This past April, 3 days after we buried him, I was standing in my kitchen with my palm flat against a doorframe. The house was cold, the way a house goes cold when the people have all gone home. I was 80 years old. My husband of 47 years was in the spring ground at the edge of the field he had ploughed since before I knew him. And I was standing at a door I had not touched in all of those years. Not once. Not in 47 years of marriage, of kneading bread in that kitchen, of banking the iron stove before bed, of folding his shirts and setting his place and living fully inside the life we had built together. There was something behind that door. I had known it since I was 23 years old. I had kept my hand off the handle every single day since. Not my children, not my sister, not the bishop. Not one living person knew I was standing there. The wood under my palm was worn smooth. From his hand, or from time, I still do not know which. If you found your way here tonight, I am glad you did. My name is not important, yet. What I carried into that kitchen is. Before I tell you what was behind that door, will you subscribe so you do not lose this story halfway through? And leave me a word in the comments. Tell me where you are listening from tonight. I read every single one. Every one. The morning we buried him, the field beside the family plot had just been turned. Someone had ploughed it the day before. I do not know who, and I did not ask. That is the way of things. Work continues. The earth does not wait for grief to finish. I am Ruth. I am 80 years old, and I have lived plain my entire life, in the same county, on the same land, in the same community my grandmother's grandmother was buried inside of. I stood at the edge of that turned field in my black mourning dress, and I breathed in cold April air and pine resin and the particular smell of earth that has just been broken open after winter. The pine box was plain, as all our boxes are. No handles, no lining, no carving on the lid. My husband had built his own years before, the way many of our men do. He had sanded it himself in the barn on 3 consecutive Saturdays in November, and I had brought him coffee each time, and he had not spoken much, and I had not asked him to. That was the shape of us. I watched that box go into the ground, and I felt the community standing behind me, all of them, and I felt their prayers like warmth at my back, and still, I was already alone, already somewhere else inside myself. The first shovel of spring earth landed on the lid of the pine box with a sound I will carry to my own grave. I did not weep then. I had wept the night before, in the kitchen, alone, for reasons I could not have named cleanly even to myself. At the graveside I was still. The community needed me still. I gave them what they needed. I had spent 47 years learning how to give what was needed and keep the rest folded inside. The shovel passed from hand to hand. The dark earth rose. And something in me, something I would not understand until that afternoon, turned over with it. Before I go back to that kitchen, if this story is sitting with you, I want you to know there is more waiting for you. You will find a guide in the description below, something I put together for those who want to walk closer to this life and what it asks of a woman. And tell me, Have you ever stood at a door you were not allowed to open? Not in an Amish farmhouse. In your own life. Whatever shape your life has taken. Leave it in the comments. I will be reading. The night before we put him in the ground, I was still his wife. That is the only way I know to say it. By morning something would shift. The community would call me widow, and they would mean it with tenderness, but the word would land differently than I expected. That night I was still his wife, and I did what his wife did. I went to the kitchen. It was near 11 o'clock. The iron stove had been burning all day from the women cooking, and it was only beginning to cool, ticking quietly in the dark the way iron does when the heat starts leaving it. I did not light the kerosene lamp. I stood in the dark kitchen and I waited for something. I do not know what. Then my hands found the flour bin, the way hands find familiar things in the dark. And I began to knead bread I knew I would not eat. I kneaded that dough for a long time, longer than necessary. I have kneaded bread in that kitchen more times than I could count, more than I could begin to count. And standing there in the dark, I tried to remember one morning I had loved it. One morning when the kitchen had felt like mine, and not like the place where I performed being his wife well enough that no one, including myself, would question it. I could not find that morning. I do not say this was bitterness. I say it the way you say a plain fact about weather. The kitchen had been where I worked. I had worked faithfully. That is what I had. And at the far end of that kitchen, in the dark, the door stood. The kerosene lamp on the shelf beside it was cold and unlit. I looked at the door. I looked away. I was 23 years old, and we had been married 7 months when I first learned not to open it. It was a summer morning, bright through the single window above the basin, and I had been putting away a crock when I noticed the door had a handle I had never tried. Storage, I had assumed. A root cellar access, perhaps, or a cold pantry. I reached for it naturally, the way you reach for something in your own home. His hand came over mine before I touched the metal. Not roughly, firmly, quietly, the way he did most things. He said it was his father's room. He said it was not to be opened. I looked at his face, and his face was closed, the way a window goes when someone pulls the shutter. And I understood that asking why was not something I would do. I did not ask why. I had been taught all my life that asking why, when a plain answer had been given, was the first step toward Hochmut, toward pride, toward putting your own understanding above what had been placed in front of you. He had placed his answer in front of me. The room belonged to his father. It was not to be opened. I yielded. I released the handle. I folded the question somewhere inside me, the way I folded everything that had no good place to go. And I went on with the morning, and the morning went on without it. For 47 years I went on without it. For 47 years, every time I passed that door in that kitchen, my hand remembered what my mind had long since stopped thinking about. My hand remembered, and my hand stayed at my side. The dough was done long before I stopped kneading it. I set it to rise on the shelf beside the cold lamp, and I stood with my back to the door, and I breathed in the dark kitchen, and I thought, tomorrow he goes in the ground. Tomorrow the door will still be standing there. His hand will not come over mine. And still I did not move toward it. Not that night. That night I was still his wife. The question was still folded. The handle was still his to keep. I went to bed before midnight, in the bed I had shared with him for 47 years. And I lay on my side, and I looked at the wall, and morning came the way morning always comes, without asking if you were ready. By 4 o'clock, the last buggy had turned out of the lane. I heard it before I saw it, the particular sound of iron wheels on gravel going away from you instead of toward you. The women had stayed longest. They always do. They had washed every dish, covered every remaining dish, stacked the benches back against the wall, and left quietly, the way plain women leave, without ceremony, without embrace, with only a hand pressed briefly to my arm, and eyes that said what mouths do not say at such times. The front room was empty. The house exhaled. I stood in the centre of it and felt the silence the way you feel cold water. All at once, everywhere, no gradual warning. I did not weep. I did not sit down in the rocker by the window, the way I knew they expected me to sit, the way a new widow sits, folded into herself, small with grief. I did not pray, though prayer was what my hands knew to do when they had nothing else. I stood in the emptied front room, and I felt something I had no word for. Not relief, not grief, not hunger, not peace. Something older than all of those. Something that had been waiting inside me the way water waits in a well, patient and cold, and entirely still, until the rope comes down. I walked toward the kitchen. My feet knew the floor knew my feet. At the far end of the kitchen, the door stood the way it had always stood. The kerosene lamp on the shelf beside it was still unlit. My feet stopped. And then they did not stop. If this story has found you tonight, I am grateful. There is something waiting for you in the description below. A small guide, something I put together for those who want to sit longer inside this world. And when you reach the end of this story, leave me one word in the comments. Just one word for what she carried home that evening. I will know what you mean. I always do. The light was going gold when I put my hand on that handle for the second time in 47 years. Not my young hand this time. Not the smooth hand of a 23-year-old reaching for something in her own kitchen without thinking. My old hand, spotted and stiff at the knuckle, the way hands go when they have kneaded and folded and stitched and planted for nearly 6 decades without stopping. The metal was cold. I had expected it to feel significant, to feel locked or to resist, or to give me something to push against. It did not. The handle turned the way any handle turns. The door opened the way any door opens, and the room behind it was small and still, and full of afternoon light through one window I had not known was there. I stood in the doorway for a long moment. I did not step through yet. I looked. There was a cedar chest against the far wall, dark with age, the kind made to last longer than the person who built it. Folded on top of it, a quilt. Not a plain quilt. A quilt in a colour I had never seen inside an Amish home. A deep, particular blue. The colour of something that had not been permitted. The colour of a choice someone had made before they understood the cost of choosing. Beside the chest, on a small shelf, drawings. Not framed, pressed flat and kept. And on top of the cedar chest, beneath one corner of the blue quilt, a letter. Sealed. Addressed in a hand I did not recognize, to a name I did not recognize. A woman's name, not mine. I stepped through the door. I crossed into the room he had kept from me for 47 years. I touched the quilt first, the blue quilt no plain home should have held, and it was soft in the way things are soft when they have been folded with care for a very long time, touched and refolded, until the fabric has learned the shape of the hands that loved it. Once I touched the quilt. Once I lifted the lid of the cedar chest and looked inside at what he had kept, at the letters, at the small objects, at the photograph I will not describe because some things belong only to the dead. And I understood that immediately, without instruction. Once I took the sealed letter from beneath the corner of the quilt and held it in both hands without opening it. I sat down on the floor of that small room with the letter in my lap and the gold light moving slowly across the floorboards, and I counted the minutes later. 23 minutes I sat there, though I did not know I was counting. He had not locked that door to keep me out. That was what the room told me, quietly. The way rooms tell things when there is no one left to protect their silence. He had locked that door because he did not know how to carry what was inside it. His mother had died before he and I were married. He had not spoken of her more than a handful of times in 47 years, and I had not pressed, because I had been taught that pressing was not love. The blue quilt had been hers. The drawings had been hers. The letter was addressed to her, from someone she had loved before she became plain, before the life she chose closed around her like a hand. He had kept all of it. He had kept it the way a man keeps something he cannot put down and cannot show. And I had spent 47 years believing the locked door was about me, about my trustworthiness, my place, what I was and was not permitted to hold. I sat on the floor of that room with his grief in my lap, and I wept. For the first time since he died, finally for the right reason. By evening I was seated at Miriam's table with my hands folded and my face arranged the way I had arranged it in public for 47 years. Composed, yielded, present. The women around the table spoke of my husband with the warmth plain people use for the recently buried. His steadiness, his faithfulness, his care for the land and the community. Each thing they said was true. I agreed with each thing, quietly, the way I had always agreed, the way I had been shaped to agree. Not from weakness, I understood now, but from something more complicated than weakness. Something I did not have a clean name for yet. I thought of the blue quilt folded in the cedar chest. I thought of the letter, still sealed, still in the pocket of my morning dress. I thought of the photograph I would not describe. I sat with his secret and mine both folded inside me, and I felt, for the first time in as long as I could reach back, that I was not diminished by what I carried. I was the size of it. I had always been the size of it. I only had not known. I am 80 now. The room is still the way I found it that April afternoon. I have not moved the cedar chest. I have not refolded the quilt. I did read the letter eventually, weeks later, alone, in that same room, with the same gold afternoon light on the floor. And I will not say what it held. Some doors, once opened, belong fully to the person who was waiting behind them. That is not my letter to carry into the world. What I carry is this. I stood at that door for 47 years, with my hand at my side, and I believed that keeping my hand at my side was love. Perhaps it was. Perhaps love sometimes looks like restraint, and we cannot know from inside it whether the restraint is serving the beloved or only serving our own fear of what the opening might ask of us. The wood under my palm is worn smooth. I visit the room sometimes, in the late afternoon when the light is going gold. I do not always go inside. Sometimes I only stand in the doorframe the way I am standing now, with my hand on the worn wood, and I think of every woman who has lived beside a door she was not permitted to open. Not in a plain farmhouse, not in any farmhouse at all. In her own life, in her own kitchen, in her own marriage, or her own silence, or her own long, careful yielding to what was asked of her. I think of her. I see her. He locked that door because he did not know how to carry what was behind it. I kept my hand off the handle because I had been taught that was love. We were both wrong, and we were both doing the best we knew. The door was never about keeping me out. It was about keeping him together. I understand that now. I only wish we'd had one afternoon to sit in that room side by side and let it all be seen. If this story reached something in you tonight, will you subscribe so you do not miss what I have not yet said? There is so much more I have not yet said. Leave me one word below, just one, and I will know you were here. I always do, and I will be back.